What a weekend. What a weekend it was. And the Big Ten had two of the marquee matchups in the entirety of college football on this weekend that we have been looking forward to. That October 12th date had been circled for so long. And so it's great to be back here with you on another episode of Believe in Big Ten. As we say hello to Tom Hannifan. I'm Rhett Lewis. Of course, Tom joining us as we, of course, take a look at the Penn State win on the road against the USC Trojans. But, of course, you had Oregon getting it done at home against Ohio State. My alma mater, Indiana, stays undefeated on the bye week as they get set to welcome Nebraska next week in what will be a massive game in Bloomington. So much to get to here, Tom. Let me just get your lens of kind of how you viewed this weekend of college football and all that came with it.
Well, the Big Ten doesn't look like the second best conference all of a sudden. It looks pretty competitive. It's pretty incredible. The parity in the top six, I think, is obvious. I know a lot of people are going to point at Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, but man, it does feel kind of wide open right now, which is exciting. You have those juggernauts, sure, but I think the way that some of these teams have played, they're going to be able to get themselves potentially into Big Ten title contention. And there's just a lot of action this past weekend that was just bright. Like, who would have thought Purdue would have actually figured out how to score points and push Illinois into overtime? I was like,
49 of them. Yeah,
didn't make any sense.
Most of them in the second half.
Rutgers kind of being really flat. I just don't expect that from Schiano football team. So a lot of stuff to get to.
Yeah, no doubt. That was one of the more surprising outcomes too. I think on, as you called it out, the overtime game where 99 points were scored in Illinois and Purdue, and then just Rutgers just absolutely falling on their face in a year where you expect so much because of the fact that they don't see Oregon, Ohio State, or Michigan on their schedule. So there was a lot there that they kind of missed out on in some of these opportunities thus far. We'll get to some of that. But I do want to start briefly, though, with that Oregon-Ohio State game, because I feel like, as you said, Big Ten is not the number 2 conference in football. And I think this game actually ended up exactly the way that it should go to kind of further that point, because no one drastically outplayed the other in this game. It was not a one-sided game. It could have gone absolutely either way. Some clock management stuff maybe at the end for Ohio State. Oregon, whether you want to say they did it on purpose or not, pulling the 12th man out onto the field at the very end, which is, hat tip if that was brilliant. Playing into the loophole there for Dan Lanning and company. But I just think that that was exactly how that game had to go for the Big Ten to say, hey, we'll flex a little bit here because these are the best 2 teams in our conference.
Yeah, Oregon was kind of a head scratcher for me the entire lead up to this. And I was like, okay, I feel like it's a sleeping giant. That's kind of what it felt like. The Boise State game, we were like, what's going on there? We now know what Ashton Genty is, so that kind of explained a little bit of that. The Idaho game, we were like, what is going on? I was of the mind, I'd said as much on State of State with Justin King, was that maybe Dillon Gabriel just hasn't completely made the transition from going from one offense to another. Transfers are not all created equal. It is not always just plug and play. And especially for a quarterback, you're having to process an entirely different offense. Well, we were pretty surprised that Dan Lanning and company were like, so everything we put on tape the first handful of weeks, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to do all this stuff. And I was saying this to you before we came on here. This looked like Dillon Gabriel circa Oklahoma. He looked like himself. He was throwing the deep ball. They were trying to go sideways a little bit with this Ohio State defense, which, considering their speed and their ability on defense, I thought made a lot of sense. But man, I was impressed. This was the Dillon Gabriel we thought we were going to get in Oregon.
It's the one that kicked off the Heisman Trophy expectation, that kicked off the national title contention expectation for Oregon and for Dillon himself. Completed 6 balls of 25 plus, 6 completions of 25 plus yards in this one, 26, 28, 32, 32, 48, and 69. And by the way, he now has over 16,600 career passing yards, third most in NCAA history. And I thought was interesting is he picked on Denzel Burke, who, we kind of lauded coming back to Ohio State this year after maybe could have been, a fringe day 1, first round pick last year into a day 2 pick. They targeted Denzel Burke 8 times, completed all 8 passes for 169 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think Ohio State will bounce back, especially defensively. And then again, I think Will Howard showed us that, hey, you want to throw it around the yard with him, and you can't rely as much on the run game, which Oregon, I think, did a pretty good job of slowing down in this one. you feel pretty good about that if you're Ohio State. You know what I mean? Through the air.
Will Howard is not Josh Allen. And I think that's the comp that everybody has made with him. And then there are some people that, well, it's Kansas State, so he must just be a running quarterback. He must be Will Levis or something like that. No, I don't want to put him in that category yet. But anyway. But Will Howard showed that he can do a little bit of everything, and he looks very, very comfortable in command of that offense. The moment did not look too big for him. I understand that last play of the game. Listen, call Nico in Knoxville and ask him what it was like, unfortunately, running out of bounds recently. So it's like, yeah, these things happen. There's some clock management issues like that. Was that a decision by Dan Lanning and company to put a 12th man on the field? If it was, genius. If it wasn't, happy accident.
Right.
Everything I saw from Ohio State is they are exactly who we think they are offensively. Defensively, I expected more out of the defensive line. I don't know about you. And it felt like a game that Ohio State had the potential to bully Oregon on the lines of scrimmage, and that didn't necessarily happen. But I don't know how you feel about the defensive line.
Well, I would say this. I think you would expect it a little bit more from Sawyer and Tuimoloau and that crew. But I think on the flip side for Oregon, you're even more encouraged because you essentially slowed down Ohio State's run game and played pretty well without Jordan Birch, who was kind of a late scratch in that game. So you got a lot out of Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti, and the two interior D-line transfers. So like that is where I think the strength of the Oregon defense is, and it showed up in that game, and that's something that they'll love to hang their hat on as they continue down the road. So Oregon, short week though, they're going to travel to Purdue to take on the suddenly explosive Purdue offense. Scored 49 against Illinois. That's a Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time kick on Fox. For Ohio State, it's going to gnaw at them a little bit because they're off this week. Bye week, and they got to sit on this for a little while before they get back into action into the last weekend of November, rather of October. So a lot there to dig into. Want to remind you, though, that Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything sports betting. Every stat, matchup breakdown, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. With the largest catalog of odds on everything from football, MLB playoffs, NHL, NBA, to political props. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. It's Bet Online, and the game starts here. Time for the State of the State here with one of the hosts of State of the State here on Believe Network. And Tom, great to have you here with us. And I know you got a chance to go back and watch that game against USC. Man, what just like for the imagery of college football, that was beautiful, right? Seeing Penn State and USC on a beautiful sunny day at the Coliseum. Like those are one of those things, like those are one of those just like pleasing on the eyes. Like that's what the pageantry of it. That's why we love college football. What was your kind of vision of how this thing just kind of looked on the surface in the new Big Ten?
First of all, the way CBS shot it, just those panning shots in the stadium, outside the stadium. Like, I'm partial to the Rose Bowl right down the road, but I was like, man, they made the LA Coliseum just look picturesque. It was incredible. I was worried as a Penn State fan and someone who covers the team coming into this game because, all right, USC has lost 2 of their last 3. You got to see the game against Minnesota, and that was very complicated. And that I was like, what is happening with Lincoln Riley's teams? Because I asked the question going into this game, which version of USC are you going to get? Are you going to get the team that showed some toughness and won against LSU in Las Vegas? Are you going to have the team that battled against Michigan in a game style that's not really what USC wants to do? They prove they can be physical and play defense and attempt to stop the run, but Michigan they know exactly who they are, despite the quarterback deficiencies. The Minnesota game was just a head scratcher. Like, I understood Darius Taylor going off, the turnovers obviously hurting you, and then Minnesota just hung in there long enough. That's not a terribly talented Minnesota defense. They just played their butts off. So I was like, all right, this is kind of a crapshoot. It's a home game. Penn State's got to go all the way across the country. James Franklin was talking about the runway at the State College Airport. As someone who's flown in there, I'm like, yes, please make this airport bigger. That would be freaking awesome for all of us. But I was just like, are we going to get Lincoln Riley and Miller Moss being explosive in the pass, or are they going to actually commit to running the football? And it was kind of yes to both. And that Woody Marks against Minnesota, an outstanding game. But Lincoln Riley's going to Lincoln Riley, and he wants to throw the dang ball. And it's like, all right, well, it's not that Miller Moss killed you. It's just that Tom Allen's defense made changes in the second half to limit you in the passing game, limit you in the run. Granted, Woody Marks went over 100 yards rushing, but they just made sure they weren't going to get killed by the big play. And this, more than anything, was the coming out party for Drew Aller. Now, I know a lot of people are going to look at Tyler Warren, his national coming out party.
Wow.
2 guys had coming out parties. Pretty incredible. Drew Aller finally proved in a big game that he will not dwindle and that he can step up. And if the defense says, we're going to make you beat us with your arm, he's like, cool, got that. And he
I'm in on it.
Very impressive.
Yeah, signature moment, certainly in the 12-play, 75-yard drive late in the fourth quarter to tie the game. And then, of course, they get the opportunity to go win it in overtime with the field goal, thanks to USC missing the field goal to start on that first. And Lance had been nails all season long. Had the 54-yarder the week before against Minnesota to tie things up going into the half. So, like, that one really shocked me. And, it's kind of interesting that you can say that about Aller on a day where, look, I'm not gonna hang him on the hook for 3 interceptions because one of them was the deep throw at the end of the half, right? But it still had a couple of turnovers and played one of his best games as a Penn State Nittany Lion, if not his best. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then I want to dig in a little bit on what you said about Tom Allen's defense in the second half, because they have been really good in the second half, allowing 27 points, I believe, combined in the second half in their 6 games, which is incredible. FBS low 86.2 total yards allowed per game in second halves. Like, that's winning football. And so when your team needs it the most, it feels like they can for sure sit there and rely on that defense to make some plays down the stretch.
The defense made adjustments because in the first half, they were getting killed by the screen game and the quick passing game. That's unfortunately kind of what Bowling Green did to Penn State earlier on this season. Bowling Green jumped out to a first half lead, hung 24 points on Penn State, and everybody was like, is Bowling Green good or are we terrible on defense? It was kind of confusing, but that was a good opportunity to learn how to play against that style of offense. I think the one thing that's really big for this defense that not a lot of people nationally are talking about is losing safety KJ Winston to a long-term injury, as James Franklin has called it, was a huge blow to this secondary. It took a few weeks for them to figure out not exactly how to replace him, but how do we supplement the guys around him. And Jalen Reed, who came up with a critical interception in the fourth quarter to really shut down anything USC could do in terms of trying to put the game away. That was huge. The pass rush just found ways to be effective, even if the ball was coming out quickly. You got to shut down the running game with Marks and company. So I think the adjustments have been fantastic. I think coming into that game, Penn State had allowed less than 100 total yards in all of the third quarters that they had played up until that point. USC only was able to score 3 points in the third quarter. So if you're able to shut them down and incrementally build on offense, that's how you come back. And I was just so impressed. Neither side of the ball for Penn State looked demoralized. Oh, the game's over. Oh, this lead is too much. No one blinked. And that's not something you can say about a lot of Penn State teams recently. And I'm as big of a homer as there is, but still, this is a team that hung in there and battled back against adversity.
I think you mentioned the third quarter, outscoring opponents 59-3 in the third quarter this season. That's the point differential. Only Ole Miss and North Texas have a better point differential in third quarters this year, which goes back to the middle 8, which coaches talk about a lot, is wanting to win last 4 minutes of the second quarter, first 4 minutes of the third quarter. It's a momentum thing, and it sets the tone for the rest of the game once you get close to that halfway point. So it feels like if we went and looked at Penn State in that category, they'd probably be doing pretty well when it comes to at least the back half of that middle 8. But the career highs for Drew Aller: completions with 30, attempts with 43, passing yards with 391, 9 completions of 15 plus after halftime. Obviously, were terrific. Now, the obviously the biggest headline in this game when it comes to the offense, was Tyler Warren, 17 receptions, 224 yards. The records that he set were fantastic. And then, threw a pass, snapped one on the touch. I mean, like, I've never seen that before. It was like we were playing, 5th grade flag football again, where the center's eligible. Like, what's going on in the mind of Andy Kotelnicki that ends up being something he comes up with? And by the way, the play was defended really well.
It was. Yeah.
And he's
Like,
coming up and made the
it
play.
seemed like the idea was let's get one-on-one and let's get a
Right.
jump ball situation with Tyler
That's what it
Warren
was.
against safety. The irony is that Ben Johnson and the Detroit Lions were like, hold my beer against
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Dallas
yeah. With the
Cowboys. Let's put Dan
screen.
Skipper out at split end and see if we can
Right.
get this slant. No, it's the beauty of Andy Kotelnicki. Did this at Buffalo, Wisconsin Whitewater before that, and then recently Kansas, is that he's extremely creative. And it's, what does your personnel do well? Let me accentuate that. The only thing that I can sit there and really nitpick is that Penn State had been accused of having slow starts this entire season. And you could say that they still did in this game. They came out and got 3 points on the opening drive and then not so much, only another 3 points there in the first half. I'm a little worried that that first 2 or 3 drives from Andy Kotelnicki involved a lot of gimmicks, a lot of gadgets, a lot of things that it's like, you can't just line up and run your vanilla offense and be better than the guys on the other side. So that's something they're going to have to answer. They've got a bye week this week. They're at Wisconsin, which that just got bumped to a night game at Madison. So that's never easy.
Yeah.
Then you'll host Penn State. Then you'll host Ohio State, on November 2nd, which that could very likely be a Fox big noon kickoff situation. So there's a lot of stuff at play for Penn State, a lot of things. This second bye week is very timely. I would like to see Penn State. Yes, it's great that you have these fun, creative plays, but you have to be able to line up and beat people with your personnel.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've expected them to do on the ground for the last couple of years. Even when the offense, wasn't having those explosive plays, like the way you could count on was Katrin Allen, Nick Singleton finding. And in the last couple of weeks, obviously without Singleton a week ago, Katrin Allen held under 100 yards and both held under 60 yards, 26 carries, 82 total yards on the ground for those two. Anything that you've seen that caught your eye that's maybe a cause for concern on that front?
Not terribly concerned because they didn't abandon the running game. You
Yeah.
still saw a good amount of attempts late into the game to try and get the ball on the ground. The way I looked at it is that Danton Lynn, who is a very, very good defensive coordinator for USC, we're biased because he went to Penn State, but Danton Lynn and that defense clearly came out and said, we're going to stop the run and we're going to make Drew Aller in this passing game beat us. And Penn State answered that question of, okay, the running game has been limited. Can you beat us with the pass? Drew Aller was even able to do that with his legs. Tyler Warren has the game of his life. It was pretty amazing to see how often they went to him. I was befuddled how USC wasn't doubling Tyler Warren, but they were playing so much zone. They were giving up those spaces. And Drew Aller, you talked about the interceptions he had. One at the end of the second half was just a prayer. Okay, great. That's off the board. The first one that was intercepted, intended for Liam Clifford, he throws that just a touch higher, and as a wide receiver, he's open there in the space behind 5 guys. And that's, I think, the thing about Drew Aller is that he can put the ball literally anywhere. That was a learning experience for him to be like, hey, just because you can doesn't mean you should try. And the second interception, it was thrown into traffic to the side of Khalil Dinkins, trying to lead him, and then it bounces off so many hands that, again, you understand what that traffic is like. Bad things are inevitably going to happen. He learned some valuable lessons there. Imagine what this game could have been if he didn't have those first 2 interceptions. And Drew Aller finds a way to operate within the offense that way. But I'm not terribly concerned about the running game being stifled or limited in this game because they didn't give up on it. If they'd given up on it, I'd be concerned. You are going to have to be able to run the ball effectively against Ohio State, though. That's what I'm worried about.
Well, and I think they kind of ran into a little bit of a, it was an inopportune time for Penn State, considering USC had just given up, dang near 200 yards to Minnesota on the ground. It was a clear emphasis. It was a clear piece of their corrections the week before, and they were going to make sure that this game was not lost on the ground to a Penn State, rushing attack that had the ability to dominate a game that way. So I think that probably opened up some things. I think you also got to take into consideration Eric Gentry, who's been their most productive linebacker. He's their most athletic linebacker, is also out again in this game. It might be out for the rest of the season, depending on what ends up happening with his red shirt and all that. But that dude, I think, would have played a role in the Tyler Warren plan as well. And as Lincoln Riley and Danton Lynn have told us, they just don't have anybody else to say, okay, you go do what Eric Gentry was doing. He's kind of a one-of-one type of player.
That's the other thing. I'm like, devil's advocate. Who do you put on him?
Yeah. I mean, Kamari Ramsey was like the only guy that I would have considered, devoting to that resume, but, or to to deal with Warren. He's got the resume, but that takes him away from like the overall piloting of that defense, which he is very much a big part of. So that's a tough kind of, danged if you do, danged if you don't, if you're Dan Lynn in that type of situation. Okay, want to quickly, before we let you go, get to some overall Big Ten thoughts as we push forward here past the halfway point of the season. But first, I need to talk to you guys about what I consider the most important part of the outfit. Yes, that is the lid. If you've been catching up with us regularly here on Believe in Big Ten, you know I love my hats. And now the problem is when you wear the same hat over and over again, especially if you're going inside and outside, coming back in, podcasting, the things start to wear down a little bit. You start to get a little bit of a sweat smell or a stain. If that's the case for you, then you're doing it wrong. You need a hat to keep up with you. And that is where Melon comes in. Not your average hats. Melon makes the most premium and durable headwear in the world. So whether you're recording a podcast, tailgating at the grass lots across from the Rock Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, maybe walking around Haymarket near Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, or just working out or on the golf course, Melon has a hat for you built to last 5 times longer than any other hat. It is my new favorite hat. I've been wearing my Melon for the past few months straight. No issues with durability, stains, no smells. It is fantastic. Looks the same as the day I took it out of the box. So the best part, though, is you have a hat for every season. Different collections that Melon has to keep you ready to go, whether you're jumping in the pool, lake, or ocean. You need the Hydro collection. Whether it's cold and you need to stay warm, you can get the Thermal collection. So whether you're out at USC in LA or maybe going to Rutgers in Piscataway, Melon has a hat for you. As tough as you, check out Melon. You won't wear anything else after you get one for yourself. Okay. Final one here for you. Tom Hannifan, gracious enough to give us a few minutes of his time. Please check out all of his great content with the State of State podcast right here on the Believe Network. As you look forward here, following the, let's say the next 6 regular season games, I feel like we're going to learn a lot. Indiana undefeated. They got a Nebraska team coming in. Big noon kickoff this weekend in Bloomington. Ohio State's on the bye. Oregon on a short week against Purdue. Has this ultimately been, now there's been, Indiana's probably the biggest surprise out of these teams, but otherwise, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State at the top. What has really stood out to you about what the Big Ten has shown us through the first 6 weeks of the season?
I think we were all curious to see what Michigan would be post Harbaugh and post McCarthy, and then their quarterback woes are brutal. But as I said before, identity matters in college football. They know they want to run the ball, be physical, and play defense. So I think Michigan is going to continue to just kind of hang around, unfortunately, for all of us. That is, not only for them. USC, I think we all expected a lot more of what they could be, but I think, again, Caleb Williams elevated that team so much, and Miller Moss is not Caleb Williams, and that's no shade on Miller Moss. There are very few Caleb Williams in the known universe, so Miller Moss is still a capable quarterback. I think Lincoln Riley's got to make some adjustments with his personnel. Washington, 1 week, I feel good about them. The next week, they kind of let you down. I was like, man, that Michigan win felt good. I had personally been a little worried that Penn State was going to host them. I think it's on November 9th after playing Ohio State. Now I'm not entirely sure what Jed Fish's program is all about. So it's just these big questions, and Illinois continues to be a threat. Penn State was able to take care of them. But again, that we talked about the Purdue game, it's like, what is going on here? I think Indiana is going to keep ripping cigs until the back end of the season. Light it up. Their season, unfortunately, because I just pulled up their schedule and I was like, oh no. It's Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, Purdue. Oh my God. I feel kind of bad for you guys. I'm sorry. 4
really tough ones, obviously. I mean, it's like we're kind of getting into the traditional Big Ten East portion of the schedule. Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State. All we're missing is Penn State this year on the schedule. So
that would have been fun.
Yeah. And then I
still have nightmares about the Penix stretch. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely. But here's the interesting part of that for Indiana. Curtis Rourke is playing better at quarterback now than Michael Penix ever did at Indiana.
The Rourke family is strong at quarterbacking.
Yes, brother Nathan was fantastic at Ohio before Curtis took over.
He's a BC Lion now in the CFL. He's killing it.
He is indeed, and had a couple of cups of coffee in the NFL as well. But I think he's found a good home there in the CFL, and they're Canadians anyway, so that all makes sense. So I'm excited to see what this. I think this Nebraska game will tell us a lot about Indiana and about their like upward mobility in the conference from here. I'm excited about that one, and then I'm going to be in Bloomington the week after when Washington comes in. So what kind of resolve does Jed Fish's team really have this year? And then, Iowa's kind of the one that everyone's just like, oh yeah, as Iowa's, Iowa's over here with Caleb Johnson running around, playing stifling defense again.
Yeah.
I pencil them in for 9 wins minimum is kind of where we're at with that.
They're good about that. Tor Ewan, WWE's Big E, is a dear friend of mine. He played for the Iowa Hawkeyes, so he and I are constantly talking about this. And he's like, listen, Caleb Johnson's real good. I'm like, how's Cade McNamara doing? He's like, well, Caleb Johnson's really good.
So listen, over 100 yards.
Iowa just has to play Iowa football,
That's
and
it.
They will rack up wins. That's what Kirk Ferentz does.
No doubt. All right, brother. Tom Hannifan with us here. Certainly enjoyed chopping it up with you, talking some ball, and I look forward to doing it again real soon. And we will catch you a little later this week as we have a more in-depth preview of Week 8 in college football and in the Big Ten coming up right here on Believe in Big Ten. Until then, be sure to check out all the content you might have missed on our YouTube playlist on the Believe Network YouTube page. Please check that out. Give us a comment down there in the comments section, and we can continue to have a conversation around the greatest conference in college football. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you. I'm Rhett Lewis. We'll catch you next time right here on Believe in Big Ten.